So why do we practice conscious breath work? Well, like I said, it has a whole host of possible psychological, psycho-emotional, and physiological effects on the system. And I'm going to go through these very briefly. And the first one, of course, is healing. That's right, healing. How does it help us with healing? Well, healing, if we understand healing, it's basically a return to balance. Illness occurs because the organism becomes out of balance. There's too much of one thing, too little of another. So a return to balance is the healing process. Return to equilibrium. The biological term for that is homeostasis. It's a return to homeostasis. So very much we're coming back to homeostasis. We're coming to a return to balance, a return to the equanimous process of life. Yeah. Breath, of course. Breath is a really good way of doing that. And we know now about heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is the way the heart rate changes when we breathe in and breathe out. So there's an increase in heart rate when we breathe in and a decrease when we breathe out. And partly that's because of the pressure changes in the chest. As the diaphragm flattens out to increase the volume of the lungs and decrease the pressure in here, air is sucked in. But along with the air sucked in, fluid is sucked in, blood is returned to the heart, lymphatic fluid is returned into the big arteries at the top by the heart here. Yeah? So there's fluid movement in the body back into the heart on that inhale as well. So the heart's going to increase its pumping rate. And what we've found so far with heart rate variability and the heart math people and the wonderful people out there doing this research is that the better the heart, the more flexible the heart is in terms of that capacity to vary its rate, yeah, the better the system is in terms of its capacity to deal with stress. So if there's an inflexibility in that heart rate variability, yeah, so there's not much variability, then the tendency is for the system, and by the system I mean psychological, psycho-emotional, physiological processes of this livingness. That's what I mean by the system. So if I use that word, you know what I mean now. So if there's a tendency within the system to get sick, there's a tendency within the system to have cardiovascular problems, whether that's strokes or heart attacks. There's a tendency within the system for more likelihood of toxic cellular growth, cancers. There's more likelihood for inflammatory conditions and diseases, such as arthritis or any other condition where the autoimmune function of the body is going a bit out of balance. And we can return to balance by working with conscious breath work. Evidence for this? Well, there's lots of evidence out there. You just have to look at books like Coherence by Dr. Alan Watkins. The HeartMath Institute has lots and lots and lots of research on this now. Heart rate variability is being taken up by the medical profession, finally, as a key indicator of well-being. The key practices of working with heart rate variability are what? Conscious breath work. So healing, a return to balance, is a key element of why we practice conscious breath work. It doesn't just sustain healing, it keeps us in good flow. Because better than healing is keeping in flow. Prevention is better than cure. If you've gone out of balance, you can return to balance. Way better is staying in balance. So conscious breath work keeps us in balance. It keeps us in flow. It keeps us in that capacity, to stay well. And staying well is what conscious breath work gives us. Conscious breath work gives us soothing and calming. By which I mean we learn to down-regulate, de-stress, down-regulate, and self-soothe. If you put your hands on your belly now, put one hand on your belly and one hand on your heart, and simply take a breath into your hands. Both of them, into the belly first, into the chest. Take a deep breath in, belly in the chest, and breathe out. And feel your hands on, and give yourself a cuddle, basically. So few people in this world are taught to self-soothe effectively. which means to bring themselves out of activated, complicated states of being charged or stressed, and to be able to bring themselves down. And so many people rely on alcohol or marijuana or sex or TV or anything to get themselves down-regulated. Down-regulation is a skill we can have for ourselves. We can have that skill by soothing and calming the system and training ourselves in that. Now, of course, in terms of systematics, what I teach people to do first of all, and what you're going to learn on this course first, is down-regulation. How to bring your system down. How to self-soothe. Because I want you to learn that before we do the energizing practices. Getting high and getting ripped on energizing practices is common. It's out there. People like it. But first of all, you have to know how to down-regulate. Otherwise, those practices are nowhere near as useful. And what we want is maximum efficiency, maximum use out of all the practices. So down-regulation, soothing, calming the nervous system comes first. And you can get that from conscious breath work. Another element of conscious breath work is energizing. So again, we have practices that can energize us, that can switch us on and bring us into a powerful, energized state. And I want to make a distinction here between activated and energized, and it's a really important distinction. Activated is feeling high, adrenalized, you're in a sympathetic state, you're slightly charged, and you feel like you've had 2 or 3 cups of really bad coffee. Not a good place to be. So some kinds of breath work where they're not so conscious of what they're doing and what the outcomes of the practices are can get you into a state of feeling very activated and very charged. I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in is energized. And energized is where you feel centered, focused, powerful, alert, aware, and vast. You're switched on. You're feeling very powerful and focused and attentive, and you're feeling huge. Your energetic continuum, the electromagnetic body, and we'll cover this later, the electromagnetic body that we also are, is switched on and alive and buzzing. And that's a very different thing to feeling activated. Okay. So energized we can do through conscious breath work, and we'll show you how to do that. Another element of conscious breath work is transforming. We can transform our state. We can change state. Now, change of state requires acceptance, first of all. If you look at the Theta Transformation course, for example, then you'll understand that state change comes from a place of acceptance, of being able to be with what's happening. Mindfulness is very much about being with what's happening. That's great. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a fantastic and necessary place to begin. But then we have to have the option to create states of optimal flow and peak performance, because we can do that. So we start from the base of mindfulness, the base of acceptance, and then we can transform. We can transform state. We can transform complex, difficult emotions that we're struggling with, such as anger or rage or anxiety and fear, or deep sadness and grief and depression. And we can transform those states and work with the medical effects of conscious breath work to bring attention to those kinds of emotion and how to move them, because we can understand the emotions through emotional literacy, emotional intelligence, apply the right kind of breath work in the right way, and we can begin to work with those emotions to transform them into states of joy, peace, equanimity, compassion. Compassion is so important. Compassion begins here, compassion for ourselves. And again, we're going to be doing some more work on this later in the course. So transforming state from the base of mindfulness, from the base of acceptance, is a really key element of conscious breath work. Another element of conscious breath work is manifestation. Now we have to understand what manifestation really means. Okay, manifestation means making things happen. Okay, it's the same meaning as the word power. Power comes from a Latin word which means ability to make things happen. Power has become abused in the Western world, and it's confused for the term dominance and the behaviours of dominance. Power is not about making other people do things, it's about making yourself do things. That's real power. So mutual empowerment is where we work together to make things happen. Power, manifestation. Manifestation begins in dreams. It begins in what we call the theta state, which is the dream state. The theta state is also the state of imagination. It's the state of creativity. So being able to access the theta state and make dreams manifest in the world through the right behaviors, at the right time, in the right way, with the right people, that is manifestation. There's no secret to that. That's a joke. There's no secret to that. It's what we human beings do when we work really well, when we're in optimal flow. So I'll say it again, it's getting into the theta state, dreaming, creating that dream, working out what actions we need to take, what goals, what steps, how do we manifest that through appropriate actions in the right order to make that happen and bring it into the world with the right people, in the right teams, in the right way. That's manifestation. And breath work gives us access to the theta state, and it gives us access to clarity and focus to enable those steps to occur. So breath work, conscious breath work, is a powerful part of the process of authentic, real manifestation. Conscious breath work enables us to access the creative state. It can, with practice, again, this is all about practice, it can give us access to the theta state. And the theta state is the dream state. And most kids all kids live in the theta state until they're around about 7 or 8. And then they go into the beta state, which is the adult state, the adult brain state. Very, very few adults can actually consciously access the theta state. Most adults can only access it in the dream state. And if those adults are really stressed out and don't sleep very well, or are taking sleeping tablets or taking alcohol before they go to bed, which many people do, then they're not even accessing that dream state very well. So one of the values of conscious breath work is that we can access the creative power of the theta state. And we can bring that creativity into our life. We can make our life our art. Life becomes art. It becomes the creative process, the living creative process of what we are and who we are and how we relate, and we bring that into the world. And conscious breath work can give us that. Another element of conscious breath work is liberation. And I have to explain what I mean by that. Liberation means finding choice. Finding choice. The reason why I say that is because most human beings, again, are acting from the compulsive place of conditioning. We are patterns. We act from neurological, psychological patterns, emotional patterns from both our biology and our cultural conditioning that inform how we should behave in certain contexts and situations, and we act those out into the world reflexively and unconsciously. Those are manifest through the process of selfing. Now, selfing is a verb, if you notice that. There's no such thing as a self. There's selfing. It's a process that the brain, body-mind does to create this experience of being a separate, independent, functional unit in the world, which has its story and its characteristics and everything else. But that's a process. It's a psycho-emotional process. And when we can make that psycho-emotional process, which we can do, we can make that process conscious. We can make that process conscious with conscious breath work and meditative depth. So with mind mastery and conscious breath work, we make that process conscious, so that instead of it acting us out as if it is real, as if it's a solid, real thing in the world that somehow has some kind of inherence, it becomes so that we are the artist in that. So even our selfing becomes artistry. What we find with conscious breath work and mind mastery is awareness space. Spacious awareness. And in spacious awareness, there is time to see options and make choices. So the past conditioning from our culture or our families, or our schools, or from our biology, does not necessarily push us into reflexive actions. We have the space to choose in that, and that space to choose in that and to dissolve the conditioning is freedom. That's what I mean by liberation. That's what I mean by liberation. And we have that capacity. We have this capacity. We have the capacity to create awareness space and understand this body-mind experience as awareness space. And that is freedom. Another key aspect of conscious breathwork is integration. So say, for example, we go through some therapeutic kind of experience. Maybe we're working with a therapist. Maybe something arises in our dreams. Maybe we're engaged in some kind of transformational work of some kind, and we have some insight in some kind of way about who we are, or about how to step forward in life, or any good thing like that. Bringing those insights into actualization, from realization into actualization, requires strategies that enable us to reweave them fully into our life. One of the key elements of that is conscious breath work. When we are more conscious of the breath through the course of the day, then we have access to awareness space to integrate insights, realizations, transformational processes into our life really effectively. We can let go. We can move forwards. We can take steps. We can free ourselves from the normal gripping experience of psycho-emotional conditioning and selfing and so on, and step forward in a powerful way. Now, I consider that anybody doing transformational work has to have practices of integration. And for me, those include body-based movement, embodied awareness. They include conscious breath work, and they include meditative depth, and they include relational work. Those four components. That's embodied awareness, conscious breath work, meditative depth, and relational work. And those different things can take different forms. I mean, relational work can be conversations. It can be talking with people. It can be deepening and loving relationship. It could be some kind of dance form like contact dance. It doesn't have to be, it's not set in a particular form. There's a lot of ways in those different elements of working together. So you can have a very embodied form of relational work, such as contact dance. You can have a very cerebral form of relational work. You can have a very emotional form of relational work, discharging emotions and being seen in that, for example, being witnessed in the discharge of emotion. But integration is a crucial element, again, of how conscious breath work can really help us. Profound practices. So far we've mentioned healing, calming, down-regulating, pacifying, soothing, energizing, transforming, enabling creativity, liberating, and integration, and bringing all of those pieces together into one cohesive experience of being fully alive, fully present, fully here, fully creative, and fully powerful and engaged in the world is what conscious breath work is about. Enjoy the practices.